Ever wonder how artists take stuff like this and turn it into stuff like that? Me too! So I've done all the research for you. Well, not all of it, but a lot of it. In this video, not only am I going to show you step by step how I have used these techniques, but I've also linked everything that I've used to learn this in the description of this video. With this technique, my stuff went from this to this. So for this video's example, I whipped up a quick drawing of Steven Universe and colored it with the normal flat colors I'd normally use. And this is where our journey begins. The first thing I do from there is copy the color layer using Ctrl-J or Command-J on a Mac. Yes, all of the different colors are on one layer for this. I just go into the hue and saturation and make it a lot darker. It's very important that you do this on a copied layer of the colors because we're still going to use the original colors in a second. The trick is to paint the lighting onto the character using the base color. Through this learning process, I found that drawing on lights is a lot easier than drawing on shadows. If you watch the videos in the description, you'll hear that a lot from them, and I can confidently say after trying it myself that it's very true. But before I really start on the lighting, I want to make a quick background to help me figure out where the light source is going to be coming from in the first place. For this, I'm just going to be using a default Photoshop soft brush to make the swirly clouds. Now in a new layer above everything else, I'm just blocking in where I want the light to come from, so that if I ever need a reminder, I always have that layer there. So with this being our new light source on the layer above the darkened colors, I use the color dropper to pick the lighter color of the area I want to light. Hide that again, go back to the middle layer, and start painting in where the light would be coming from. To avoid doing what I just did, use the magic wand tool on the darker layer of the color you want to light. Then with the selection made, go back to the middle layer and paint the light there. This will keep it confined to just that color. From that point, you can take a soft eraser and use it to erase some of the light and bring back some of the shadows if you need it. This is also a really easy way to do drop shadows and cast shadows on a character. When I was done doing that all the skin areas, I decided to have another light source creating a rim light on the opposite side. I was thinking this would be like a pinky color to complement Steven and his color palette. Now when I light the pants, I have to account for the main light source and also the smaller thinner band of light on the edge. This creates a nice line of shadow that follows the form of the character. This shadow is called the Terminator, and I'm not entirely sure about the science behind it, but it just makes things look a lot more three-dimensional. You can see that I cut out the light layer on the pants and start over a couple times and redo it because I really didn't like how it was looking, and each different colored light layer is on its own separate layers so that you can start over like this without ruining the rest of the lighting you already did on the other areas. At this point I was loving how the pants came out, and it made me realize how bad the skin was, so I cut it out and decided to just redo it at the end of everything else. Once all those areas are now lit, here comes the fun part. I'm going to start with the skin layer and make a new layer underneath it. I want to select only the light, holding Control and clicking onto the box on the layer. If you click on the layer and don't click the actual little box, it won't select at all. Control or Command clicking the light will select only the light on that layer that I drew. Now with the selection made, I go back to the layer that shows all the original colors again to pick that color like I did before. Except now I'm making the color warmer on the scale and adding saturation by picking a color closer to the top right. Now that I have the color I want and the selection is made, I go up top to the Select tab, go to Modify, and expand selection. I usually go by 2 pixels, but it may be different for you depending on how large of a canvas you're working on. Then you just go back to that new layer under the light layer of that area and fill it in. I didn't like how it looked with the expansion, so I ended up skipping that step for this piece, and I could still see it underneath the lighting layer anyway. You can instantly see how it adds more color and life to the character. This is what you call subsurface scattering. What I'm doing is a very simple example of it, but it's still super effective. Now I just do that for each light section, making a new layer under each of them for the subsurface scattering underneath it. Control clicking the box to select just the light on that layer, fill it onto the new layer I just made, and after I've done that to every layer, it comes out looking like this. This is what it looked like before, and this is after. Now I'm just selecting the shield in a similar way, and when that's done, on the new layer I create more of that pink rim lighting on the edge of Steven. To make the light look extra glowy and fun, I use the overlay setting on the blending options of that layer. Then for the background, I do that same thing, making a nice pink area set to overlay, and then a yellow area set to overlay, making sure to really go over the outer edges to bring out a nice shine. Here you can see that my line art looks different. That's because I have it set to overlay also. It shows the colors painted underneath it, so if you use this method for coloring line art easily and quickly, which I do all the time, you have to remember to fill all those colors really close to the outlines without there being any space in between, otherwise it does this. And that's gross. But for this one, I didn't like how the overlay was looking, so I just set it back to normal, and I just made the outline a nice dark pinkish red by making a color overlay of it in the effects. If you don't know how to get to the effects, you just double click on the layer, and it should bring up a nice box of options. After you've turned on an effect, you'll see an FX symbol on the side of the layer. I did the same thing to my shadow colors layer, but I used a different method by having a new layer above it, filled in with that color I want to change it to, and then make that into a clipping mask by holding Alt on the line between the two layers till I see this little arrow symbol. Then click and you'll see that the layer on top is now sort of indented with an arrow next to it pointing down to the layer below it. That's how you know it worked. Then I just changed the opacity of this color to make the blue less intense. I made the shadows blue to complement the warmer pink and gold lighting. A rule to remember is warm lights cast cool shadows, and cool lights cast warm shadows. So if I had this bluer lighting, the shadows would be more overlaid with like a red. After that's done, I do a little more color editing with contrast and saturation, which I end up regretting completely. You'll see I end up having to redo that at the end. And then at the top menu bar, I select All and copy Merged. This copies everything, showing it as a flattened image. I just paste that onto a new layer, and then with the layer selected I go up to the menu bar again, go to Filter, Blur, and then Gaussian Blur. Then after it's blurred, we once again set the layer to overlay in its blending mode. This makes the lights lighter and the darks darker in a fun glowy way that I mentioned before. So I want to keep that look, but I don't want the darks to be so dark. This is why I ended up regretting that I changed the color and contrast before, because now I have to lower the contrast. So I use an adjustment layer by clicking on this sort of half circle underneath the layers and selecting brightness and contrast. Then I just make sure that that layer is put above everything and use the sliders to bring the contrast down. Next I want to put a nice glow on the edge of a shield where the light hits. So I went up to Filter, then Render, and chose Lens Flare. This only works on a piece if it's totally flattened into one image. So I suggest doing this as one of the last steps too after the brightness and contrast changes. And after that, I used another fun trick of putting a gradient on a new layer. Since the lighting in this piece is like yellow at the top right and pink at the bottom left, I used the default yellow and magenta gradient going in the proper direction. After that, I once again set it to overlay and then bring down the opacity to a place that I like. Then the very last steps are adjusting some of the color layers and contrast and things that I should have waited till the very end to do. And with all of that done, we went from this to this to this. And now you can replicate it too, but because I went through my entire rendering process and spent less time on the individual techniques, you can watch the videos in the description that I linked you to get more of the info that I got when I was learning. My next video will be attempting the same thing, but with cool lights and warm shadows. I'm thinking kind of like a cool nighttime scene of Spider-Man. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure to hit subscribe and click the bell for notifications so that you're notified when I post it. I hope this was helpful for you guys, and I know it was a little more advanced than some of the stuff I normally do, so if you have any questions about anything that I didn't cover in this video, make sure to leave them in the comments below and I will answer everything that I can. But as always, thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye!